The moment that would forever stain the history of American courtrooms unfolded in what should have been a routine trial. The courthouse, a place meant to represent law and order, was violently torn asunder by an outburst of chaos. A man who had already become infamous for the murder of Charliekirk suddenly lunged forward in a desperate, uncalculated attack. The courtroom, once sterile and formal, erupted into chaos. The defiance in his actions was not just an impulsive move, it was a desperate farewell, a final attempt to control a life that had already slipped beyond redemption.
Welcome to True Crime Tapes, where we bring you the most gripping, mysterious, and heart-stopping stories from the world of true crime. If you're fascinated by the unknown and want to uncover the secrets that the world tries to hide, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a chilling story. And for those of you already part of our community, welcome back. We're glad to have you with us. Drop a comment below to share your thoughts and theories, because we love hearing from you. True Crime Tapes. The truth is always stranger than fiction.
For a few seconds, the usual calm of polished wood flags and robed judges disappeared. The shooter's body surged forward in an attempt to reclaim some semblance of power. The marshals rushed in, shouting commands, their bodies colliding with the attackers as they fought to restrain him. Spectators screamed in horror, some rising from their seats to flee, while others stood frozen in shock. Reporters, with trembling hands, hurriedly scribbled notes, trying to capture the unimaginable events unfolding before their eyes. Although cameras were prohibited in the courtroom, the story spread quickly, and within minutes the nation had visualized the chaos: the shooter's contorted face, the marshals struggling to contain him, and the room descending into panic. This was not a simple loss of control. It was the culmination of a life that had been spiraling out of control, shaped by chaos from the very beginning. The shooter's past was marred by instability. A father who disappeared, a mother burdened by her own struggles, schools that gave up on him instead of guiding him, and communities that whispered about his anger without ever reaching out to him. He grew up feeling invisible until he learned that anger could make him seen. His youth was spent in the shadows of frustration, later feeding on online forums filled with resentment and rage, where he connected with others who shared his grievances against society, politicians, and the world at large. By the time he crossed paths with the name Charliekirk, the fuse had already been lit. For him, Charliekirk wasn't just a man, it was a symbol of everything he thought was wrong with the world. His act of violence was less about Kirk as a person and more about Kirk as an embodiment of all his hatred. And yet, in choosing this target, the shooter sealed his own fate. His life was never going to be his own again. In custody, the shooter showed no remorse. Guards noted how he stared at them with cold, unwavering eyes, daring them to challenge him. Inmates either avoided him or tried to provoke him, but he carried an aura of menace that kept most at a distance. When he spoke, it was not in regret but in warning. "The system's rigged," he'd mutter. "They'll never understand why I did it. They'll just bury me." And in the courtroom, as the marshals rushed in to subdue him, his prophecy seemed to unfold. He never expected freedom. He never expected mercy. His last wish was attention. One final act of defiance in a world he felt had ignored him for too long. For the shooter, the courtroom was a stage. His violent outburst was his performance, his last moment in the spotlight. He knew the outcome of his trial was inevitable. He knew that prison would consume him. But in his mind, this act of chaos was his way of writing his own ending. Even if it failed, even if he was left broken on the floor, he hoped this final strike would define him, not as just another faceless prisoner, but as a man who refused to go quietly. This act would have consequences far beyond his own fate. The judge, rushed to safety, would never forget the chaos of that day. Lawyers, once accustomed to combative arguments and tense trials, would forever remember the moment when violence erupted just inches away from where they stood. Jurors, who had been poised to decide the shooter's fate, were escorted from the courtroom, their faces pale, their belief in the safety of the justice system shattered. For reporters, it was surreal. Reality itself seemed to collapse under the weight of a man's fury. For the families of the victims, the courtroom attack was a painful reminder of the ongoing wounds. They had already endured the agony of losing loved ones, had already relived the horror of the shooting in their minds, night after sleepless night. Now they witnessed the shooter's last act of defiance. This was not a man accepting responsibility. This was a man who refused to take accountability for his actions, even when restrained. To the victims' families, this was the proof they needed that this man would never change, never repent, and never stop hurting people, even when surrounded by armed officers. His violence was not a momentary lapse. It was an intrinsic part of who he was. But behind the locked doors of his prison cell, The shooter would have no choice but to face the consequences of his choices. Solitary confinement, a life of chains, and years that would bleed into one another. Each year darker than the last. Prison wasn't just punishment, it was erasure. The world would move on. His name would fade from the headlines, replaced by the next act of madness. To a man who fed on chaos and needed attention like air, that was the most unbearable fate of all, being forgotten. So, in his final moments, he convinced himself that his attack had been worth it. He told himself that the world would remember him for this act of defiance, for shaking the courtroom, for fighting to make a name for himself. But the truth was much colder. History doesn't remember desperate men. It remembers the destruction they caused and the silence that follows. His outburst wasn't power. It was the final desperate gasp of a man who was drowning. In prison, the shooter would replay the scene in his mind over and over, the alarms blaring, the marshals gripping his arms, the room erupting in chaos. He would convince himself it meant something. That he had taken control, made his mark. But in the silence of his cell, he would know the truth. The world saw not defiance but collapse. Not strength but desperation. His last act was not a declaration, it was a surrender, even if he would never admit it. Years would pass, and his name would resurface only in true crime documentaries and news programs. His victims' names would be honored, remembered in memorials, prayers, and family gatherings. His own name, however, would be spoken only as the villain, the shooter, the man who chose hate over humanity. He had tried to make himself a symbol, but in the end, he was forgotten as quickly as he had been heard. Outside, the world continued to debate the meaning of his violence. Commentators clashed on television, debating security, politics, and his motives. Psychologists analyzed his mind, labeling him broken, dangerous, a product of unchecked rage. Politicians used his name to further their agendas, twisting his actions to fit their narratives. But for the shooter himself, none of this mattered. He would never hear the debates. He would never see the headlines. His world was confined to concrete, steel, and silence. The trial continued, but the outcome had already been decided. Life without parole. His attack had been his last act of rebellion, but it had only locked him in tighter. There would be no redemption, no second chance, no new beginning. The courtroom attack sealed his fate. For Charliekirk's shooter, the story ended in chaos, in violence, and in an unforgiving prison system. The world moved on, leaving him behind, a ghost trapped in the shadows of his own choices. In the aftermath of the trial, the psychological burden of Charliekirk's shooter's life was immense. Charlie had spent years around the killer, often witnessing casual remarks and unsettling behaviors that, in hindsight, seemed like clear warnings. Anniversaries of the trial reignited the torment. Investigations unearthed old-school records, photographs, and rumors about their time together. One particularly damaging revelation came when an archival tape surfaced, capturing a conversation that hinted at foreknowledge of violent intent. While no direct evidence tied Charlie to complicity, the tape solidified public perception that he had known more than he admitted. Despite the lack of criminal charges, the societal verdict was far harsher. Friends abandoned him, family members distanced themselves, and Charlie retreated into isolation, living on the outskirts of society. Alcohol became a coping mechanism, but it only worsened his decline. Charlie's identity became consumed by who he had once known, his life shaped by the actions of another. He was defined not by his own choices, but by his association with the shooter. Meanwhile, the case continued to reverberate through society. Schools, politicians, and communities debated how warning signs could be recognized earlier, and what could have been done to prevent such violence. Documentaries, books, and true crime podcasts kept the story alive, ensuring it remained embedded in the national consciousness. Charlie's name was often mentioned in these retellings, a constant reminder of his connection to the tragedy, even as he avoided direct involvement. Charlie's life became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how proximity to evil can condemn even those who never directly committed violent acts. His silence, whether out of fear or uncertainty, carried consequences just as heavy as action. As true crime culture continued to grow, Charlie became the subject of endless speculation, theories, and internet debates. His life trajectory served as a reminder that even those who never wielded the weapon can be permanently reshaped by its use. As the years passed and the killer aged in prison, Charlie's life became less about guilt and more about the broader questions of moral responsibility. Scholars, ethicists, and cultural commentators began to use Charlie's situation as a case study, questioning whether silence in the face of suspicion is itself a moral failing. Communities debated the implications of his actions, and Charlie became a symbol in the discourse surrounding crime, complicity, and responsibility. Charlie's existence became an extended form of punishment without trial, his name reappearing in discussions about moral responsibility, peer intervention, and the weight of guilt. His life remained a testament to the consequences of silence, a reminder that even those who never directly committed violence can be permanently altered by the actions of others. The story of Charliekirk's shooter and the devastating aftermath serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of silence, complicity, and unchecked violence. It's time for all of us to reflect on our role in preventing such tragedies. If you believe in the importance of early intervention, recognizing warning signs, and holding ourselves accountable to the safety and well-being of our communities, take action. Share this story, engage in discussions about responsibility, and advocate for stronger systems that prioritize mental health support, education, and intervention. We can no longer afford to stay silent in the face of danger. Stand up, speak out, and help create a future where tragedies like this are prevented before they begin. Your voice can make a difference. If this story has made you think deeply about the importance of responsibility, accountability, and preventing violence, don't miss out on more impactful content like this. Subscribe now to stay informed and engaged as we dive into important discussions, uncover hidden truths, and explore how we can create safer, more compassionate communities. Join the conversation and let your voice be part of the change. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Subscribe today and be part of the movement for a better tomorrow.